My daughter-in-law called me useless in the house I owned, then tried to control my money, my space, and my peace. So I stopped explaining, signed 2 documents, and let her find out what my silence was really worth. I used to think my own home would always be my sanctuary, right up until my daughter-in-law started moving my furniture around without asking. 6 months ago, Vanessa and my son, Caleb, moved into my upstairs apartment, supposedly to save up for a down payment on a house of their own. In the beginning, we hit a nice, peaceful groove. But last week at Sunday dinner, everything shifted. I casually suggested we dial back the thermostat a bit now that spring was finally here, and Vanessa just laughed right in my face. She looked straight at Caleb and said I was being old-fashioned and completely useless, adding that my modest widow's pension barely covered the electric bill anyway, so I didn't really have a say. Caleb just sat there in total silence, staring down at his plate, moving his food around. He's always been like that, completely passive, easily swayed by her, and utterly incapable of looking me in the eye when things get uncomfortable. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't waste my breath trying to defend myself. At 66, I've learned that silence can carry a hell of a lot more weight than a shouting match. I just watched Vanessa quietly as she took a smug sip of her wine. She clearly took me for a weak, lonely widow she could easily push into a corner. The very next day, she started packing up my old kitchen gadgets into cardboard boxes to make room for her own high-end appliances. She was treating me like an annoying house guest who had overstayed her welcome. But this house is mine, free and clear, paid off entirely by my late husband and me. On Monday morning, after the 2 of them left for work, I drank my coffee with absolute clarity. I didn't spend the day doing my usual yard work. Instead, I sat down at the laptop in my home office. I opened up my online banking account. Ever since they moved in, I'd been transferring $800 a month into a joint account to cover groceries and shared utilities. With just a few clicks, that recurring transfer was gone for good. It was a completely silent move, executed with total precision. They thought I was a helpless burden. Tomorrow, the first automatic bill payment was going to bounce, and it was going to be a major wake-up call. On Tuesday evening, I was unwinding in my armchair with a good book when Vanessa marched into the kitchen and started slamming the cabinets open. I heard the dishes rattling, followed by a loud, exasperated sigh. Caleb walked in a moment later, his shoulders slumped like they usually are. Vanessa shoved her phone right in front of his face, loudly complaining that the joint debit card had been declined during her grocery run at the supermarket. She threw a demanding look out into the hallway, shouting to ask if I'd forgotten to transfer the money. I carefully set my book on the side table, stood up without rushing, and leaned against the kitchen door frame. I looked at them and told them, in a calm, steady voice, that I hadn't forgotten a thing. I explained very factually that I had permanently cut off my financial contributions, since Vanessa herself had made it clear that my pension wasn't enough to make a meaningful difference anyway. Vanessa stared at me, completely flabbergasted, her lips tightening into a thin, angry line. She immediately tried to turn the tables, accusing me of acting childish and turning my back on my own family. Caleb just stood there, looking incredibly uncomfortable, staring at the floorboards and muttering that we should be able to talk about this like normal people. But as far as I was concerned, normal conversation had ended a week ago. I didn't engage with her emotional guilt trips at all. Instead, I simply let them know that from here on out, everyone was on the hook for their own expenses. If my money was so worthless, it certainly didn't need to go toward buying their groceries anymore. Vanessa let out a scoff and said they could easily afford to fund their own lives and didn't need a dime from me. She turned around with an attitude and started whipping up dinner just for herself and Caleb. I smiled to myself, walked back to my room, and closed the door. This was just the opening act. They hadn't even begun to grasp what it actually cost to run this house. The next step, waiting for them tomorrow, would hit even closer to home. Wednesday morning came around cold and crisp, and I kept right on executing my plan. Up until now, I had always done the cooking, the laundry, and the heavy cleaning for the entire house while the two of them were at the office. That came to a screeching halt. I washed only my own clothes and hung them up on my small drying rack in my bedroom. I left Caleb and Vanessa's laundry baskets sitting down in the basement, completely untouched. When Vanessa got home that afternoon and saw the overflowing laundry, she called out for me, clearly annoyed. I didn't even bother to answer. I just stayed in my room, enjoying my book in total peace. At dinner, the two of them sat down over cheap microwave meals, while I had fixed myself a fresh herb omelet. Vanessa looked around the messy hallway and asked me, in a heavily critical tone, why the vacuuming hadn't been done. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that I wasn't their unpaid maid. I was the owner of this house. If they wanted a clean living space, they were going to have to sacrifice their own free time to keep it that way. Caleb made a pathetic attempt to step in, saying, "Come on, Mom, you're home all day anyway. It's not like it takes that much effort." Those words didn't even hurt anymore. They just solidified my resolve. I politely informed them that my retirement belonged to me, and I would be spending my energy on my own interests moving forward. Vanessa laughed bitterly, claiming I was just trying to get petty revenge. I didn't say a word to that. I wasn't angry. I was just drawing a very clear boundary. When I finished eating, I cleared my plate and washed it by hand right away. Their dirty dishes kept piling up in the sink because the dishwasher wasn't going to run without the detergent pods I bought. Lying in bed that night, I could hear them upstairs having a massive argument. It was finally sinking in that convenience comes with a price tag, and they were the ones who had to pay it now. On Thursday, I took things a step further and reclaimed my space. My house has a large, comfortable basement room that my late husband used to use as his workshop and hangout spot. Without ever asking for my permission, Vanessa had started using it as her personal storage unit, piling up her old moving boxes, winter boots, and clothes she never wore. Right after breakfast, I went down there, neatly sorted through all of her stuff, and hauled the boxes up to the second-floor hallway, stacking them neatly right outside their apartment door. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was just a logical restoration of order in my own home. When Caleb came home from work later that afternoon and saw the wall of boxes in the hallway, he called down the stairs, sounding incredibly anxious. He asked what the hell this was about, and if I was throwing them out on the street. I stepped out of my apartment and calmly explained that the basement was officially back under my exclusive use because I needed the space for my own crafting projects. Vanessa came home a few minutes later and practically started screaming. She accused me of being malicious and intentionally stripping away the storage space they desperately needed. I didn't let her loud tone rattle me in the slightest. I reminded her, very level-headedly, that they were living upstairs completely rent-free and had absolutely no claim to my private basement. I told them that if they needed more square footage, they were more than welcome to go out and find an apartment on the open market. The word rent seemed to hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She immediately deflected, claiming I was trying to manipulate Caleb. I looked over at my son, waiting for him to step up, but he just averted his gaze, looking thoroughly ashamed. I turned around, locked my door, and slipped the key into my pocket. It was time they learned to respect other people's property. The weekend passed in a cloud of icy silence, but Monday brought the next major shift. I am the sole account holder for the high-speed internet and all the streaming services in this house, and the bills are auto-paid directly from my account. Up until now, I'd been generous enough to share the Wi-Fi passwords with them, but since Vanessa considered me entirely useless, I saw absolutely no reason to keep subsidizing their entertainment and convenience. I logged into the router settings and changed the Wi-Fi password for the entire house. My own tablet and TV stayed online, while all of their devices instantly lost connection. When Vanessa tried to get some work done on her laptop upstairs that evening, she realized the internet was down. She stormed down the stairs and pounded loudly on my door. I opened it, completely unfazed. She snapped that the internet was broken and that she had urgent emails to send for her job. I told her flatly that the internet was working perfectly fine, but that I had changed the password. Since they felt I contributed nothing of value, I figured they wouldn't want to use the services I paid for either. I suggested that if she needed internet, they could easily call the cable company and order their own dedicated line for the upstairs unit. Vanessa was practically boiling with rage, accusing me of intentionally sabotaging her career. Caleb came down the stairs behind her, practically begging me to just give them the password, even if just for a couple of days so she could finish her work. I looked at him and said that choices have consequences. They had gone out of their way to humiliate me, and I was officially done financing their lifestyle. I closed the door right in their faces. It felt incredibly grounding to see how controlling the small, everyday logistics could completely flip the power dynamic. They were finally learning the hard way that my contributions to this household were anything but invisible. And I wasn't done yet. Thank you for watching Quiet Revenge. AI tools may assist some parts of our workflow, but every story is carefully chosen, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team. If you'd like to help keep these stories coming, please consider supporting the channel with the price of a small coffee. Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/The Story Family Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Kun Your kindness means more than you know. Tuesday brought the first real shift in their attitude. The trash was now overflowing in the kitchen. The sink was full of crusty dishes, and the house no longer smelled like the home-cooked meals I used to make. Vanessa was finally realizing that her stubborn pride wasn't getting her anywhere. Around dinner time, Caleb knocked timidly on my door. He was holding a bag of the expensive gourmet coffee roast he knew I loved. He looked completely exhausted, and it was obvious the non-stop tension between him and his wife was wearing him down to the bone. He quietly asked if he could come in for a minute. I let him step inside, but I didn't offer him a seat. He hesitated for a second, then started trying to apologize for the things Vanessa had said the week before. He claimed she hadn't really meant it and was just under an immense amount of pressure at work lately. I listened to him quietly, never interrupting once. When he finally ran out of things to say, I looked at him and told him that an apology from him for his wife's behavior didn't mean a thing. Vanessa needed to be adult enough to understand how to treat people herself. Besides, I added, this wasn't just about one nasty comment. It was about the deep lack of respect they had both shown for my home and my life. Caleb looked completely helpless. He admitted that running their own lives and trying to save for a house down payment was turning out to be a lot harder than they had anticipated. Without me picking up the tab for groceries, doing the cleaning, and covering the utilities. Their budget was completely blown. I reminded him that they were the ones who had called me useless. If you want to be independent adults, you have to actually pay your own bills. He left my apartment empty-handed, leaving the coffee on the table. I didn't touch it. I didn't want peace offerings. I wanted basic human respect. The next day, my daughter-in-law completely changed her tactics, launching a brand new, incredibly brazen move. On Wednesday evening, I ran into a surprise I had actually seen coming from a mile away. Vanessa sought me out for a direct conversation for the first time, but her approach was pure manipulation. She walked into my kitchen with a forced, sweet smile, sat down at the table without being invited, and laid out a highly detailed Excel spreadsheet right in front of me. The paper listed every single monthly fixed cost for the house, the property taxes, the home insurance, water, trash pickup, and electricity. She slid the paper toward me like she was giving a corporate presentation. She spoke in this overly sugary tone, telling me that as a family, we really needed to stick together. She pointed out that because inflation had driven up the cost of groceries and utilities, she wanted to propose a new arrangement I would take over paying all the fixed household bills out of my pension. In exchange, she and Caleb would take back over the grocery shopping and help me out with the lawn care. She genuinely tried to spin it like it was the best possible deal for me, saying it would take all the stress off my plate so I could just enjoy a quiet, carefree retirement. She fully expected me to just nod and sign off on it. I picked up the sheet of paper, scanned the numbers for a brief moment, and just shook my head inwardly. She had explicitly calculated it so that I would sacrifice almost my entire monthly income to maintain her comfort, while they kept hoarding their paychecks for their future house. I set the spreadsheet aside, looked her dead in the eye, and said exactly one thing. No, I'm not doing that. Vanessa's fake smile vanished instantly. Her face contorted with anger, and she snapped, asking me how I could possibly be so incredibly selfish. I stayed entirely calm. My financial independence was my shield, and I had absolutely no intention of handing it over to her. She snatched her spreadsheet off the table and stormed out. After I shot down her spreadsheet, the atmosphere in the house turned completely hostile by Thursday. Vanessa decided to try a little psychological warfare. She completely ignored my existence whenever we crossed paths, and she made sure Caleb did the same. To be petty, they started leaving the hallway lights burning all night long and cranked the thermostat in their upstairs apartment to the absolute maximum, knowing full well that the utility bills were in my name. They honestly thought they could leverage skyrocketing utility bills to force me to my knees and make me accept their terms, but they had completely miscalculated my resolve. On Friday morning, I didn't bother calling the electric company. Instead, I took matters into my own hands. I have the only set of keys to the central utility room in the basement, which had been completely off limits to them ever since I changed the locks on the basement door. I went down there and adjusted the main control valves, capping the maximum temperature for the upstairs radiators to a standard, perfectly reasonable level. It wasn't freezing up there, but their little game of wasting my energy was now physically impossible. The costs stayed firmly under my control. When Vanessa realized that evening that her radiators were only putting out a mild warmth despite being turned all the way up, she came flying down the stairs and pounded on my door. Caleb stood right behind her with his arms crossed. She yelled that the heating system was broken and that I was forcing them to live in an icebox. I cracked the hallway window open a nudge, looked at her calmly, and said the temperature was well within standard residential guidelines. I told them that if they were chilly, they should put on a sweater. Their attempts to financially bully me had failed miserably. The real climax was just around the corner, and I was ready to end this. Saturday brought the ultimate turning point. Over the last few weeks, I had quietly made a major decision that was going to change the trajectory of my life for the better. This house was simply too big for me to manage alone anyway, and the constant friction was draining my peace of mind. I had secretly reached out to my longtime friend, Diane. She owned a beautiful, brand new condo downtown that was completely accessible, and she had been looking for a reliable tenant. After a quick lunch meeting, I signed the lease, but I had no intention of leaving my house sitting empty. After lunch, I asked Caleb and Vanessa to come down and sit with me at the kitchen table. They walked in, looking smug, clearly thinking I was finally throwing in the towel and ready to surrender. Instead, I slid 2 legal documents across the table. The first was an official notice terminating their rent-free arrangement for the upstairs apartment, giving them a generous 3 months to vacate. The second was a signed contract with a local property management agency, authorizing them to lease out my entire house to a lovely young family starting this fall. I was moving downtown to enjoy my life. Vanessa's face went entirely pale. She stared at the paperwork, her voice shaking as she stammered that I couldn't do this to them, that Caleb was my son, and they couldn't afford the steep rental rates in the current housing market. Caleb looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes and asked, "Mom, why are you doing this to us?" I looked at him and said calmly, "I am doing this for myself. You both called me useless and tried to take over my money. Now you get the chance to prove you can handle being adults without my help." They sat there in absolute silence, completely paralyzed by the logic of their own consequences. The dice had been cast. 3 months later, I stood in the empty entryway of my house. The walkthrough with the new tenants was scheduled for tomorrow morning. It was an incredible relief to see how clean, bright, and peaceful the house felt again. Caleb and Vanessa had moved out the week before. They ended up having to settle for a cramped, expensive 2-bedroom apartment on the far edge of town because their budget was severely stretched without my safety net. Their dreams of saving up for a massive suburban home were officially on the back burner. They were going to have to watch every single dollar and manage their own lives now. Caleb had called me yesterday afternoon. His tone sounded entirely different. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something much more grounded. He asked if we could grab a cup of coffee downtown this weekend. Just the 2 of us. I told him I'd love to, but I set a firm boundary right then and there. Financial topics and Vanessa's complaints were strictly off limits. He accepted the condition without a single argument. We didn't have some overly dramatic, emotional reconciliation, but those firm boundaries ensured that he was finally starting to respect me as an independent person with her own life. I locked the front door behind me and felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. My new apartment downtown was filled with natural light, modern, and best of all, completely quiet. My pension was more than enough for me on my own, and the steady rental income from the house gave me a layer of financial freedom I'd never even dreamed of before. I didn't need a team of lawyers or a messy court battle. I just needed my own quiet courage and the power of my own signature. I got into my car and drove toward my new life, without a single regret and completely excited for what was next. I had finally won my life back. Thank you for watching Quiet Revenge. AI tools may assist some parts of our workflow, but every story is carefully chosen, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team. If you'd like to help keep these stories coming, please consider supporting the channel with the price of a small coffee. Kofi, https://keo-fe.com/the Story Family Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Kun Huangmin. Your kindness means more than you know.